So let's talk about coldzera. Um, coldzera, as the HOTV article on your page shows, has requested an MIBR benching. He wants to move on. He wants to go somewhere else. He feels his time with MIBR has run. There were rumours around a year ago that he wanted to leave as well. So I imagine these are just a resurfacing of those. And now he really does want to leave. They managed to convince him to stay last time, but I think now he's really had enough. And I just wanted to talk about coldzera. Um, what happens next with him, with MIBR? Who could reasonably add him to their team? Or even unreasonably in some cases. Um, so yeah, as you can see there, coldzera will not be at the. Oh no, so that article was from a few days ago. It did suggest that Cold wouldn't be at the Star Ladder Major, and Zeus would stand in. I think it has now been clarified that Zeus will not be able to stand in. I think coldzera will likely play with MIBR at the Major. But yeah, let's get into this. So the impact on MIBR is the first thing I want to talk about because MIBR were a legendary team with coldzera. Let's not forget, maybe not under the brand of Made in Brazil, but under the SK Gaming and Luminosity Gaming tag, they were the most feared team in the world at points. And even when they weren't the most feared team, they were one of them, and always went toe to toe with Astralis when they were good. Um, Maybe not always; they did diff after a while, but they were one of the most feared teams in the world, and that should never be forgotten. This is a massive chance for them to rebuild. They've constantly been built around coldzera and what he can do, and they think he's the best player in the world. And they've always been built around getting into these late round situations where coldzera can do what coldzera does. He closes out these rounds. That's always been what they've gone for, and I think you're finding more and more that as they try and change the fifth player in their team, or they kick tack over Stewie and Tarek, that this core isn't working for whatever reason. And I think if you're MIBR and you were going to cut one of those fallen for Cold, it wouldn't be Cold, right? He's the one who you would almost certainly keep. But this gives them a. I think the silver lining for them is if Cold does leave, they have a chance to rebuild in a completely new style. And maybe get the best out of Fur, who has been very hit and miss recently. He hasn't been at the form that made him possibly the scariest CT side player in the world at times. Um, so I think that it does give MIBR a chance to completely change their style, reinvent themselves, because they do seem to be stuck in a rut of doing the same things and expecting different results. And as Einstein once said, that is the definition of insanity. I don't actually think it was Einstein. Complete tangent. I think it was somebody else, but that's not really relevant. The Ewing theory. Now, this is a theory from basketball, I believe. I've got the Urban Dictionary definition there for you. I know it's not the most resolute of sources, but you'll have to bear with me. So the idea is that, as you can read, when the star player goes, the team actually improves better. And it says the two present situations: a star player receives a lot of attention but never wins anything. Sounds pretty familiar to me. And then the star player leaving the team and everybody writing the team off. People are already writing MIBR off. If they lose Cold, I think that'll be even worse. A similar concept for this was Mouse, but obviously that team changed a hell of a lot. But Mouse when Nico left. But yeah, so the Ewing theory suggests that maybe, or when a team inexplicably becomes better after losing their star player, and this is a very real. It's potentially a very real phenomenon. I mean, it's a theory hashed by an ESPN writer. It's not. It's not a rule of life, but I think it's an interesting theory anyway. And I do think that there is a chance, as mentioned in the first point, that if MIBR rebuild in a completely different style, they will actually be a better team without coldzera, who, for all the good things he does, he also changes the way you have to play the game in many ways. Let's go back to that. Short term, it messes them up a little bit with the major because they will be playing with coldzera. They won't practice much. His heart won't be fully in it. You can argue the whole, when they know the team's dead, they play better. Maybe that's true. We'll find out. But I think if that is true, it will be because they're in the process of changing style, and it will be because somebody like Fur is reignited. Who replaces him? So, I mean, I've heard rumors of. I say I've heard. Somebody DM'd me to tell me Henny was going to go to MIBR. I don't know about that. It would make sense for him to follow his brother, right? But I'm not sure he's the right player that would fix MIBR. But who else do you get? Obviously, you can't sign any of the Furia players. They've with some community backlash, signed a 5-year contract with Furia, so you're struggling to get any of those. You can look at players from Team One or a similar level of team, but then you do have to, you're losing experience. You're losing your second caller as well in coldzera, and at times primary in-game leader. Um, and you probably want somebody who can match that as well. Maybe that's why Lucas was brought in, because he can do a little bit of that. I don't know for certain. Um, but there aren't too many Brazilian players out there who you can just plug and play that they haven't already tried. Um, I can't see KNG going, for example, but maybe I'm wrong. KNG is a superb player, and he also offers the AWP threat that you would lose from coldzera, although Fur has decided to pick up a little bit more recently for whatever reason, and so it's Taco. So yeah, I think replacing him is very difficult. I think that's the issue I'm going to have with going towards the Ewing theory that they would get better without coldzera. That may be true, but only if you find another decent player who can fit into whatever style they're going for now. But I'm not sure that player exists outside of Furia, who they've already enraged by not paying the 200 grand they wanted for Serato, which now looks really silly, doesn't it? When people said, "Oh, why would you pay $200,000 for an untested player?" and it's like, well, if you think he's good enough that you wanted to sign him, surely you think he's good enough that he's worth a fifth of coldzera. Because as we'll get on to, the rumors are that MIBR want over $1 million for coldzera, but they wouldn't pay a fifth of that for Serato, who is similar stylistically, if not in terms of levels at the moment. But that now looks silly, and now you can't get him to replace it because he's just signed a 5-year contract. So you're really struggling. Will MIBR be forced to change style? I think so. I don't think you can find a player like coldzera who will make you better than not having coldzera. I think you have to go a completely different direction. coldzera is one of the best passive players in the world. If you just get a slightly worse coldzera, you're just going to be a slightly worse team. I think you have to go for an aggressive player who is of a similar level. I don't know. Again, I think you're struggling to find a player who is good enough. I did have a name in mind, but I cannot remember it. So KNG is more aggressive and extremely talented. Whether or not you're gonna risk the PR nightmare that he brings is another matter, right? But you have to change style, I think, if you want to be a better version of MIBR with coldzera, because you're not going to get a better version of coldzera to do the same role. Hopefully this does allow the freedom to allow Fur and Fallen to play again. I don't know if that's entirely true. I've misstylized Fallen's name. It should be a capital F and a capital N. I apologise. I think it would be brilliant to see Fallen back at his peak again. And Fur was always one of my favourite players to watch. But for whatever reason, they haven't been able to hit those heights recently. Hopefully, some new blood, a new idea, a new way to play the game will reinvigorate them. And I don't know what the issue is. But hopefully, whatever that issue is fixed by this complete change in style, complete change in direction, and breaking up what is a core that has changed Counter-Strike in many ways over a long period of time is gonna have pretty big effects on any team. If you're when Fnatic lost Olofmeister, it was huge, and now they're still reeling from that in a way, still trying to find a style, find a way to play, and they're building around JW, and that's nice. But you lose Olofmeister, you lose Flosher, you lose so much identity out of that. Hopefully, MIBR can find a new identity to play with, but time will tell. I mean, I do think they needed a drastic change, and this is as drastic a change as you can get. Buying out coldzera, as we see in the bottom right, Don Hackey tweeted that he heard from a trusted source MLBR wants around $1 million for Cold. I cannot personally clarify, cannot personally confirm that to be true or not, but he generally doesn't tweet things he doesn't know for sure, or is at least pretty certain of. So we will see. But if I'm working on the basis that this is true, I see no reason to think it isn't true when you see the buyout for Kenny S was around 800,000. The buyout for Stewie was monstrous. Like, this is just the going rate now for a top level player. Who can realistically afford him? I don't know. I really don't. I didn't think FaZe were willing to spend or had money to spend. Um, but there are rumors that they are in for him. Um, I would be surprised. Who else can even like put up that money? I mean, Mouse Sports have shown that they're willing to spend, but I don't think they're going to get him. Team Liquid don't need him. Um, $1 million is a lot for an esports organization. No matter how much money they make, putting that much money plus a salary into one player is a lot. He would be one of the most expensive players in history. Depends on what you hear about Stewie, but I think he was around the same price. Um, there was all sorts of rumors about Nico around 500,000, I believe, was sort of accepted figure. So coldzera would be one of the most expensive players in history if anybody does decide to buy him. But it's coldzera. You're not going to get him for cheap. You don't get a player like him with a pedigree like his for cheap. The issue I would have is diminishing returns. For $1 million, you would get coldzera, but for who does that? Are you getting more out of coldzera for 1 million, or out of, for example, Sunny for maybe half that? The is he worth that extra $500,000? And I think for a lot of teams, you're going to find that the answer is no. And finding a cheaper player who is slightly worse or slightly untested um, is generally a better business idea, even if from a pure playing point of view, coldzera is really good. In business terms, $1 million for a player who is slightly better than another top player who would cost 600,000 or 400,000 isn't really worth it. And I know it kind of it depends how much you think coldzera as an individual player will move the needle on you being a good on being one of the best, being the best team in the world, or being a top 3 team in the world, versus being a top 10 team in the world. Do you think he moves that needle? And if so, maybe it's worth it. I understand that Counter Strike and winning tournaments is more about is about more than money. But on the business side of things, you do have to be conscious of this. Money doesn't grow on trees, as the old saying goes, but money is finite for all of these organizations, and it would present a massive, massive risk to spend that much money on a single player, no matter how good coldzera is. Right, so let's move on to coldzera as a player, and what would he bring to any team that he may or may not join. He is a two-time HLTV #1 player. You're not going to find that anywhere else. You're like, you aren't going to get that for cheap. You're not going to get that from any other player that's available. He's a two-time #1 player in the world. He obviously has the fragging ability, that goes without saying, but he is more passive than a lot of aim stars, which allows a sort of interesting dynamic between the more aggressive players, where he can be the guy who baits them. He can be the second man in, or the third man in, or the clutcher. He offers more than just run in, click on heads. He offers that passivity. And that ability to meld with, I mean, he's a beta, right? Everyone knows it. It's not up for debate. He is a beta, but maybe some teams need that type of player, and they need somebody who's experienced enough to know when to bait and how to bait, because it is somewhat important. It's out there. I think it's been said a lot of times by the members of MIBR. That he is the second caller, and he does a lot of speaking to the team in terms of strategy, in terms of where to go, like reading defenses and attacks. And it was also mentioned that he did in-game lead for a short while for MIB. I don't know if he still does a little bit of that, but the biggest rumor is FaZe, right? And FaZe's in-game leader is Neo, who has been underwhelming, or depending on who you listen to, a complete failure. I don't think he's been that bad, but and they need an in-game leader, or they at least need maybe a second caller. It's well known he's good friends with Nico. Those two can just call together if needed. Like, it's not ideal, but it gives you an excuse to put coldzera on an already stacked lineup. He could, in theory, in-game lead your team. I'm not sure that's the best use of coldzera, but it might allow him to call around himself and play around himself. But we've seen too many players become in-game leaders and lose what made them great. So I would loathe to make him the in-game leader of any team he joins, but that is an option that you have. He has the experience of big stages. I know it seems like a silly point to put in, but you aren't risking picking up a player who doesn't know how to deal with like the nerves of playing on a stage. You don't have to risk that because you know coldzera does not care about the big stage. He's used to it. He's more at home on a big stage than he is at home, and maybe you wouldn't get that with a completely untested player. He closes rounds. Certainly for 2 years, he was the best round closer in the world. You do need to pair him with aggressive fraggers because he's not going to enter sight. He's not going to get too many opening picks, but he will close you rounds. He will win you clutches, and he will just do his job as well as anyone in the world. Whatever his job is, he'll do that job and he'll do it well. But you can't rely on him to enter sites. You can't rely on him to open rounds, but you can rely on him to close rounds. He also secondary AWPs. Arguably good enough to be a primary AWPer, but again, you wouldn't really want coldzera being your primary AWPer. It seems a waste. You want coldzera to have room to call, to AWP, and to bait when you want him to, or when he wants to, rather than when being told something to do, because he is a player who needs that freedom. He understands the game well enough that you let him do what he wants and you play around him. I do wonder how well that would mesh. Obviously, him and Nico are friends. It's well sourced, But him and Nico are very similar in the resources they want. They want to be able to call either primary or secondary. They want to walk whenever they want. They want to play the way they play and have everyone play around them. And I do wonder if having coldzera and Nico on the same team would be a bit of a clash. But I mean, they're both decent enough to get away with it. They're both decent, I would say, in my expert opinion. The risks of taking on coldzera, so the monetary and opportunity cost of spending $1 million on a single Counter-Strike player is huge. When I speak of opportunity cost, I mean that for $1 million you could get two players of a slightly worse caliber. You can do so many things with $1 million in terms of Counter-Strike. You could completely restructure. You can buy an entire new org. And I mean from a more business perspective there, but in terms of players, that's a very real thing. And that if you pick up coldzera and you think you can improve on two of your players, you pick up coldzera, you're only going to be able to improve on one because that is going to be your budget for a long time. $1 million is a giant cost. If the rumors are to be believed, that is a lot of money to spend on a player, and you do have to worry. That is going to take a massive chunk out of your budget for a while. And if it doesn't work out for somehow, some way, that does represent a giant loss. If it doesn't move the needle too much on how good a team you are. You might need a team to be built around him a little bit. You do want him to have that freedom. You want him to be your star. You want him to be able to bait, to be able to clutch, to be able to AWP when he wants. You need to let him do what he wants to do. And for that, you need to sometimes sacrifice yourself for him. And that is difficult, as MIBR are finding, that you do when you have coldzera on your team, the game becomes about coldzera. And even from a non-egotistical point of view, that might change the way you play Counter-Strike. Obviously, the reward when he's good is that you become the best team in the world. When he's not the best player in the world, it can be a little bit difficult to play around that. I put potential communication issues there. I don't know how good his English is. I assume it's pretty good. I don't think he would have massive communication issues, but you have to remember that he has spent most of his career playing Counter-Strike calling in Portuguese. And it may take a little while for him to be able to speak, to call fluently in English. I'm sure he can speak fluently in English, but calling in English and Counter-Strike talking, Counter-Strike language is very different to just normal English. I don't think that would be a massive issue. I think he could pick it up pretty quickly. but it is something to keep in mind that it may take a little while to adjust. Arguably hasn't been the number one level. Like when he was the best player in the world, obviously he was utterly brilliant. He was almost untouchable, right? And while these ratings that have popped up on your bottom right are pretty damn good, I mean, a 1.26 at IEM Katowice, 1.31 at Blast Pro Series Lisbon, 1.37 in Pro League. Okay, it's Pro League Online, whatever. 1.3 at IEM Sydney is it's pretty ludicrous. Those aren't the there's plenty of poor events there or poorer events, um, where in previous years he would have just completely decimated that opposition. Um, and he hasn't been that same level anymore. And so obviously some of that will come down to the fact that MIBR aren't opening the rounds for him to close. But I think that shows almost one of his weaknesses, in that you have to have these other players that will open up rounds. I don't think on his own he is a win condition, but he is the best round closer in the world. Um, you know what you're getting with coldzera, and if that's the play you want, then he'll do his job. coldzera to FaZe is the big rumor. Um, I thought this was completely ludicrous, because I didn't think FaZe had enough money, and it also just sounds like something somebody on HRTV would say like 3 years ago, and everyone would just laugh at them. But there are rumors from fairly reputable sources that coldzera to FaZe is in discussions. I don't think it will happen just because of the money that is being rumored. Um, but I could be wrong. If it did go through, however, it would be one of, if not the biggest transfer in Counter-Strike history. This would be massive. This is a team with Nico, Rain, Olofmeister, Guardian, Neo. You have to cut one of them for coldzera. coldzera to FaZe. This is a two-time HLTV number one player going to FaZe, a team with these superstar names. And if they cut Neo for coldzera, that is just it's a stupid team, isn't it? It's stupidly stacked. It sounds like, again, it sounds like something you came up with 2 years ago when you didn't really understand, or 4 years ago when you didn't really understand Counter Strike, and you just picked like 5 players that you liked and put them on one team and said, how good would this team be? That's what it sounds like, right? You go back in time 2 years ago, somebody stopped watching 2 years ago and say, yeah, FaZe just signed coldzera. Their lineup's now Nico, Olofmeister, coldzera, Guardian, Rain. And they think you were mental. It would be a massive transfer of a player who's tied to this. He's always been tied to this core. And there's always been sort of what ifs of, what if coldzera was on a super team? What would happen? And maybe we're going to find out. I'd love to see it. I just want to see what would happen. Because I have no idea if it would work, if they would just completely break the rules that we all accept as true, or if they would succumb to the fact that they are just 5-star players and they do miss the structure, and somebody has to sacrifice themselves, and maybe Olofmeister and Guardian struggle, and maybe coldzera does well, or Nico falls off. It would be so interesting as a concept, like FaZe with coldzera. I'd be surprised if FaZe can afford it. I really don't think they can, but I kind of hope they do. It would be so fun. Who would you cut? I spoke there about Neo and the fact that coldzera has second called or even been in-game leader at times for MIBR. So that is an option that exists, and I think in a world where coldzera goes to FaZe, you might as well just cut Neo, because you're all in on just having as many superstars as possible. Like you're already over the limit of the amount of stars you're gonna have. You might as well just go 5 stars, right, and see what happens. Neo is the newest addition. It does seem a little bit harsh to cut him. I wouldn't be surprised if they did pick up coldzera if Guardian left and maybe retired, which would open up the fact that FaZe would then have 4 players who are very, very capable secondary AWPers, with no primary AWPer, which would be very similar to the way Liquid are, except Nitro is nominally the primary AWPer. I think Nico would nominally be the primary AWPer on FaZe. I could see a world where Guardian went. I would also see a world where Olofmeister left and went to NIP to replace GetRight. That sounds really fun to me. Olofmeister to NIP, coldzera to replace him on FaZe. Who says no? Like, probably MIBR. But that sounds really fun to me. NIP obviously looking for a player with Get Right retiring. You're looking for a veteran superstar, Olofmeister. Just saying. So the only players I can't see going are Nico, obviously, and Rain, who seems to be a mainstay on that team, and he seems to be quite a. There is no reason to cut Rain, right? Like you can't ever see him being cut. He's one of the youngest members on the team, and he goes in first. He normally just goes in first and allows Nico to just sort of bait him. He would allow coldzera to bait him, and he will just occasionally just start popping some heads. But that isn't really his job in FaZe. How much does coldzera to FaZe really move the needle? FaZe currently not a top 6 team, I don't think. I don't think that's controversial to say. Does coldzera to FaZe really put them as a top 4 team? Does it put them as a top 8 team? Like, what? I'm struggling to see how much coldzera to FaZe improves FaZe. Let's say you replace Guardian, right? Does that massively improve FaZe? I don't think so. It makes them, I would say, probably a little bit better with the form Guardian's been in. But does it make them $1 million better? And I think that's where I talk about the theory of diminishing returns, which suggests there is a point where spending money isn't actually getting you the benefit that money should. And I think 1 million for coldzera to replace Guardian would be silly. I think to replace Neo, you're almost like that could potentially move the needle to make FaZe a top team, because that is just way too much firepower for any team to deal with. But it's such a giant risk, and there are so many cautionary tales of teams losing an in-game leader to just go with another star. And it doesn't always work out. Maybe sometimes it does, but it doesn't always work out. And do you really want to take that risk on a $1 million signing? Maybe you do. I don't know. To me, I think coldzera to FaZe doesn't really move the needle enough that I would be breaking the bank sign him. I think FaZe could probably negotiate a slightly smaller buyout because MIBR will not want him on their books for too long. Who else could reasonably get him? A few months ago, maybe a year ago now, our good friend Nell suggested that coldzera wanted to leave after, I think it was 2 majors ago, and the rumour then was that Liquid were interested. Now, that was when Taco was on Liquid, and I think coldzera wanted to play with Taco again. Clearly he's given up on that pursuit if he wants to leave now. But I wonder if Liquid, if they did start dipping from their obviously #1 status, if they started falling off a little bit, would they be re-interested in a move for coldzera? I don't know how well Stewie and coldzera got on MIVR. Maybe there's some bad blood there. Or maybe they just get on. They still get on, and they wouldn't mind playing with each other again. It's impossible to tell who you would cut at this point in time, because you don't know how the form's going to work for the team, for the players. But also, Elite speaking Portuguese means that if Cold was struggling to adapt to English, he has Elite who can speak Portuguese to him. He can help him fit in. I could see a world where Nitro left, coldzera came into in-game lead. It doesn't sound fun, but I could see a world where it would happen. So I wonder if Liquid, if in a few months they do start to drop off, they would be interested in coldzera. Would be a very interesting move anyway, and with a team with that much firepower adding coldzera, it's a scary team. Mouse have shown a willingness to spend to improve. If you remember the Snacks deal. Okay, they signed Snacks, and you were proven right or wrong, whichever you thought about Snacks. But I personally liked the idea in that Mouse had a chance to sign a player who used to be the best player in the world on a relatively cheap deal. And while it didn't work out, they showed that they were willing, when they were already a top 5 team, they were willing to spend a decent chunk to try and really push their push the pedal to the metal in a way, and really like try and elevate themselves to the best team in the world, rather than just sitting on their hands and saying, well, fourth is pretty good. They've shown their willingness to spend, but they are a new team, so I can't see them buying coldzera just yet. Maybe if things didn't work out in the future, maybe they didn't qualify for the major. Um, coldzera is a player who is available. Mouse have shown a willingness to offer deals to all sorts of players from all over the world, different like misfits, and coldzera is serious firepower to add to any team. Um, I can't see it happening, but there is a world where Mouse think we have a chance now to be a top 5 team, to be a top 2 team. Let's get coldzera. I can see that happening. I don't think they have $1 million to spend. A few other options are just I was looking through the teams, thinking who is it even like who even speaks English or Portuguese, and has a space at coldzera. NRG. I mean, I don't think they can afford it. I mean, they're not. They're relatively rich. I think they're part owned by Shaquille O'Neal and all sorts. So they probably have the money. They speak English. Maybe coldzera is so desperate to leave MIBR. He wants a new challenge. He's like NRG. They're the team. Breezy and Ethan. Yeah, they're my boys. I can really elevate them to be the best team in the world. I have my doubts, but I mean, I'm struggling to see other teams that I could realistically see coldzera play for. I mean, I can't realistically see him play for NRG, but I think it's more realistic than like Astralis or who speak Danish, or one of the Swedish teams. I just can't see that happening. NIP coldzera or anyone. Furia, I obviously I can't see that happening either. They've just signed 5-year deals to all of their players. It'd be a bit harsh to cut one of them for coldzera. Amongst other factors like a $1 million supposed transfer fee. Renegades, I don't know anything about Renegades' funding. They've shown a willingness to take on a European player at least, and I think they are based in America, so it wouldn't be too far for coldzera to go. I mean, obviously coldzera to Renegades isn't going to happen, but you can't deny it would be a really interesting thought experiment to see coldzera play for Renegades, like JKS as and then maybe like I don't know who you cut, like I don't know who you get rid of. Presumably Jacane, but that seems a little bit harsh. He's been pretty good for Renegades. I like Liaz. I think Liaz is a good player. I wouldn't cut him. But it really, how badly does Cold want away? If Cold really wants to leave, I could see him going to NRG. I can't really see him going to Renegades, but it was just a name that I wanted to throw out there. It would be really interesting, if almost impossible to work out, and I also can't see coldzera thinking, what, Renegades, they're the team for me. But I mean, if FaZe can't afford him or don't want him for whatever reason, you're really struggling to find a team where coldzera can fit in. I genuinely think NRG is one of the more likely places for him to go, and that is, yeah. I mean, he could go to one of the other Brazilian teams. He could go to Luminosity. He could go to, but like I can't see Luminosity spending that much money to get coldzera, and I don't think. I think he's looking to move to a mixed team because I think he's had enough of. I think he's played with nearly all of the Brazilian players now, and I don't think he sees any of them as worthy of MIBR. And if they're not good enough to play with MIBR, I think he's going to want to play with different players. Look, I'm not saying NRG is likely or even remotely possible, but who else? You are really struggling to find teams there where he would fit in. There's another name for you, Cloud9. They do seem to change their team every few weeks, so look, I don't think they made a big deal about spending so much on FNS and they got burnt. I don't think they're going to spend 5 times that on coldzera, but if the numbers around the Stewie deal are correct, they do have money. I mean, they will have spent some of that on Kusta, Mixwell, Cajun Beat, etc., 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 because they've had so many players. But I'm thinking about a month down the line when they think, well, it's high time we change the roster again, Automatic's upset again, or somebody else wants to leave, or whatever the rumors around Cloud9 are at the time. Maybe Automatic goes to a mixed team instead, and they think, let's really, really push the boat out, and let's try and get coldzera. There aren't many bigger organizations in Counter-Strike than Cloud9 in terms of like fan base and things like that. Maybe they could afford him if they got a decent fee for Automatic. I know players, whenever there's a player available, Cloud9's name always comes up, right? But that's because they have been willing to sign pretty much anyone and try them. coldzera would be hilarious, but again, you are really struggling to find teams where he would fit in. I think Cloud9 isn't actually that unrealistic in a few months, though. Just a few closing thoughts as this video has gone on far longer than expected already. Thank you if you have stuck with me. coldzera surely cannot stay bench for long. MIBR, that is a huge asset in terms of money. Nearly $1 million if rumors are to be believed. So that money is doing nothing. If coldzera isn't playing for you and you have a player worth that much money, you might as well sell him. You don't want to be sitting on an asset like that who's only going to depreciate when he doesn't play, right? So they'll want to shift him on, and again, it's coldzera. He's not going to stay bench for that long. Somebody's going to buy him. It's just who is that going to be? FaZe do need a reinvigoration, and a pretty big one, I think. They need to change something huge. I don't think they can afford to risk that much money, but if they don't, who will? I just finally wanted to put a sobering thought in about the inflation and the cost of CSGO players. When Nico joined FaZe, I think the rumor was $500,000, that was seen as like a massive landmark figure, and that was like a huge thing. And now $500,000 for a player, you just sort of go, yeah, that sounds about right. And you hear $1 million for coldzera, and I thought, yeah, that makes sense. It's coldzera. As a football fan, I know where this leads. So yeah, there's a giant inflation in the cost of CS:GO players in the last couple of years. But it seems like the orgs are not actually able to pay for them as much as they were before. Hopefully that doesn't become a trend and we don't see people just stuck on the bench of teams for too long. Sunny. But hopefully that isn't a trend and it is just that this is coldzera and this is the point where people go, no, this is too much to pay for a Counter-Strike player, but I can't see that happening. I just wanted to throw that out there as a closing thought. Thank you very much. I've been Elliot AZS Griffiths for Rushby Media. Thank you for listening, reading, whatever you've done along with me. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon.